Luis Arraez is a singles machine. That's why he does not move the needle for the White Sox, who desperately need to add power to the lineup.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Todd Welter. Welcome to Locked On White Sox, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm a lifelong Sox fan. I've been podcasting here for over a year and a half and covering the team well before then. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. Well, I'm going to get to why prospect Caleb Bonemer seems to be a bit underappreciated by White Sox fans, especially since Baseball America thinks he could be a top 10 prospect someday on this week's Minor League Monday segment. After I discuss the recent Zips projection forecasting the White Sox to have a terrible offense, which does not bode well for adding more wins next season. But first, let's discuss hoping the White Sox do not sign Luis Arraez, as some publications suggest, because he's not going to provide the offensive upgrade the White Sox need. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So I feel like the White Sox are actually set with bat-to-ball skill guys in the lineup. Edgar Caro, Chase Mydroth, and Brooks Baldwin, I think they're covered there. And Caro still has the potential to add power to the lineup. And power is what this lineup desperately needs. That's why they don't need a singles hitter like Luis Arraez, like the Athletic keeps suggesting. I mean, don't get me wrong. I still appreciate a hitter that brings back the memories of Tony Gwynn. And I still think the White Sox need to add at least 3 bat-to-ball hitters for an ideal lineup at right field. I mean, they should always have at least 5 power hitters, maybe a swing guy that can also have good contact and also a little bit of pop. But they will always need at least 3 bat-to-ball hitters. But they need those bat-to-ball guys to also run the bases well and play defense. 2 things Luis Arraez doesn't do well. And just because Arraez barely strikes out, won 3 batting titles, and did play for San Diego, it doesn't mean he's the second coming of Tony Gwynn. That does not mean he's this generation's Tony Gwynn, basically. First, Arraez's career high 354 average is 40 points below Gwynn's career high in 1994. And if there's no strike, Gwynn may have hit 400. Second, that 354 average Arraez has, that being his career high, that would have been Gwynn's 5th best ever, as he had 3 more seasons where he hit over 360, including the 1994. So he had 4 seasons where he hits over 360 and one where he almost hits 400, if not for a baseball strike, ruining that. And I think the thing that gets overlooked the most with Tony Gwynn, other than he was very hard to strike out, was he actually could slug the ball despite only hitting 135 home runs over 20 seasons. Yes, he did not put the ball over the fence, but he did slug 459. Arraez, his career is 404. Also, Arraez's average declined to 292 this past season. Gwynn only had 1 season with an average under 300, and that was his first in 1982. So while I appreciate Arraez leading the league in hits is all he provides. Because when you look at even the value numbers, not great. 0.9 FWAR last season, with a WRC plus of 104 last year, or this last season. Again, the White Sox also need power out of first base, not singles. They barely got 20 home runs with Andrew Vaughn, Lenyn Sosa, Miguel Vargas, Ryan Noda, Bobby Dahlback, basically a revolving door. Tim Elko. Basically a revolving door at first base that could barely provide the power that you want out of a power position. You don't need any more singles. And I do appreciate the fact he doesn't strike out, but he also doesn't get on base much unless it's a hit. He's got a career 6.5% walk percentage. So if the average continues to decline, so is the on-base percentage, because his on-base percentage is mostly made up of getting hits. But the Athletic keeps feeding this idea the White Sox should sign Arraez. First it was Jim Bowden, now it's Andy McAuliffe. Here's what he writes when he suggested the White Sox sign him as part of his Black Friday discount theme that he put out last Friday. I couldn't find a perfect fit for Arraez because it's hard to find a fit for such a player. Everyone knows the things he doesn't do particularly well: run the bases, play the field, hit for power. And everyone knows the thing he does as well as anyone in baseball: hit singles. Since he debuted in 2019, Arraez has collected 805 singles, 71 more than the next most prolific singles hitter, Trey Turner. As the White Sox continue their rebuilding effort, it wouldn't hurt to have a guy like Arraez, especially if his bat catches fire and he can be dealt for prospects in July. But my concern is, if that's the, hey, we're going to flip him at the deadline, what type of prospect package is he going to bring back? I don't think it's going to be this elite prospect package. I mean, yes, he was traded to the Marlins for Pablo Lopez, big league player for big league player. I could see that happening, but the White Sox probably still need more young talent with controllable years. I mean, since he doesn't hit for power, a lot of teams are probably going to be looking more for a power first baseman first rather than a singles hitter. And singles and walks are pretty much the same thing. So if he produced more doubles, yeah, I'd be interested. Basically, if he was this generation's Tony Gwynn in terms of being able to slug the ball more, I would say sign him up, because he is a professional bat, but he's a professional singles hitter. He's not a professional slugger that just can't put the ball over the fence sometimes. I mean, I would rather see if Lenyn Sosa can be an everyday first baseman, because at least he can hit between 260 and 280, so you get a still solid average. But most importantly, he can hit home runs. Yes, I would take Lenyn Sosa over Luis Arraez because, again, of the power potential and the fact that Lenyn Sosa can still get better. And he's still under control for more years. He still comes cheaper, and he's not going to cost you as much as Arraez is. And the White Sox ultimately need more power, because the only other value that I could see Arraez bringing to the South Side is he does all right hitting with runners in scoring position, and that is something the White Sox need to improve on. He had a 287 clip in RISP last year. However, when you look at the win probability added, determining did it really make some noise, his win probability is barely above 0. So it's not like he's going to be bringing these clutch hits when you definitely need it. So that's why I'd rather see Lenyn Sosa possibly get better rather than potentially tying up $17 million for 2 seasons in Arraez like ESPN projects. I would rather see that $17 million used towards a long-term contract for Kazuma Okamoto. Use that $17 million as part of that, hopefully getting him at the floor of $36 million over 3, or even 5 for 70, or maybe even go into 90. I'd rather have that, or that $17 million used on the starting rotation, because I actually agree with the front office angles that most teams have, according to ESPN's Jeff Passan. Here's what he recently wrote on ESPN.com. Teams can't help but see Arraez for everything he isn't, like a passable defender, or a source of any power, or even a halfway decent base runner. Arraez is perhaps the greatest litmus test yet for the power of batting average in the modern game. He's an absolute contact savant, striking out only 21 times in 675 plate appearances this season. The lowest strikeout rate since Tony Gwynn was fanned 15 times in 577 plate appearances 30 years ago. And in a game in which offense has been poisoned by the punch-out, Arraez's ability is worth a lot, just not enough in the minds of executives to warrant a big money deal. Arraez won't be begging for a job by any means, but because poor defense pushed him from second to first base, where he was not particularly adept either, and his .292 batting average was barely better than a league average hitter, his contract offers won't be bustling. Arraez is generally great at what he does. What he does so great just happens to not be valued the way it used to be. And it should be, because average is part of the story of a hitter. It's part of the slash line. Can you get hits? And then the on-base percentage. Can you get on base more than the hits that you get? And then the slug. Can you cause damage? Can you hit more doubles and triples and home runs? That's why I like to put together the slash line. If you're just a singles hitter, great. You get on first base. A walk and a single are the same thing. You're on first base. But maybe Arraez could at least help improve the White Sox offense with his singles ability. Something has to be done, though, to avoid a brutal projection for the offense next year, according to Fangraphs. And let's discuss the Zips projection for a bad offense coming up after the break. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. And my favorite is the same game parlay or the player props. It gives you a chance at a bigger payout. For example, you really think Chicago is going to pound Green Bay by 14 or more points? Well, that is at plus 1,300 the last time I checked. So $10 on that, and it hitting could pay out $130. Think it's going to be the opposite with Green Bay winning by 2 or more touchdowns? Well, that's at plus 250 the last time I checked, so you still got a chance to double your money. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, so can you. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch a show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe at wherever you get your podcasts. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. Also, make sure to check out my written content at SouthsideSox.com and on TapSportsNet.com. Well, I talked about the White Sox Zips projection on Friday's show. Fangraphs' Dan Szymborski forecast, that system that he has to forecast what might happen next season, does project the talent level to be raised enough to where the White Sox will likely have no negative WAR players. Celebration. Hey, they've hit at least the bare minimum. However, he also projects a terrible offense. And if the White Sox want to have that internal improvement so the win total can continue to improve, the bats have got to beat this poor projection. That is why I do want to see an upgrade at right field and first base made in the offseason to improve the offensive output. Because again, as I talked about on Friday's show, Zips has not, taken into account any of the offseason additions that could potentially be made. And here's what Szymborski writes about the lineup. There are still questions about Colson Montgomery, and he likely won't ever be a favorite to put up a good batting average or on base percentage, but his power arrived and he can play credibly, play shortstop. The power has most certainly not arrived for Chase Maedroth, but he's shown he can hack it at second base. He's fairly disciplined at the plate, and he's a pretty solid contact hitter. He doesn't have a lot of star potential, but if the batting average creeps up a bit, he can be a useful OBP-heavy second baseman. The White Sox haven't figured out their catching spot yet, but Kyle Teal probably has the best average outlook and the highest upside, so hopefully he'll be given every chance to push out the competition and seize control of the job. Surprisingly, Zips thinks Luis Robert Jr. still has a decent amount of upside left, and the Sox might as well play him and see, since I don't believe any team is going to be willing to pay the Palhos what they'd want to part with him. Miguel Vargas is fine as a stopgap third baseman, and he showed that many analysts had given up on his bat too quickly, but he's still too much of a tweener. Not good enough defensively to be plus at third, and not really interesting as a hitter if useful at first base or designated hitter. Of all the left fielders in baseball, Andrew Benintendi is one of them. Lenyn Sosa will mostly play first base since the White Sox don't have an obvious place to play him otherwise, and he kind of hits, and right field and DH will largely be populated by whoever's hanging around on the roster and isn't starting elsewhere. This offense will almost certainly be one of the worst in baseball in 2026, but I'd much rather watch this group than the one the team had entering 2024. So, hey, at least they've made some progress from 2024. But again, the progress you want to see is these guys basically beating these projections. You want to see Colson Montgomery have a little bit of a better on-base percentage, a little bit of better average, and then sock a ton of home runs. You want him to beat the 23 home runs Zips projects Colson Montgomery to hit. And I think he's going to do that. I mean, he hit 21 home runs in 71 games this past season. But there is maybe some potential regression being projected, because Zips projects a guy like Lenyn Sosa to only hit 18 home runs next season. And not projecting, like I said, a ton of power. Kyle Teal, 12 homers. Edgar Carroll, 8. Vargas, 16. And then when it comes to like having a slug over 400, there's only 4 regulars projected to have that. Colson, Luis Robert Jr., Vargas, and Brooks Baldwin. And even then, notice why I'm lumping Baldwin in as the regulars, is right now he's probably your starting everyday right fielder without an upgrade. And even if he is, even if they do make a signing in right field, he's probably still that Ben Zobrist that they view. So he's going to be getting a lot of at-bats next season. Now, the good news is, though, the 80-20 scale projection, basically the floor and ceiling, does project a couple of hitters potentially ending up in that 2 to 3 F4 range if they hit their ceiling next season. I mean, Teal and Montgomery project to 3.7 if they hit their ceilings. LRJ, 3.3 F4. Chase Mydroth, 2.8 F4. Vargas, 2.9. However, the floor, let's say everybody just stinks, which did happen in 2024, so it's possible. The highest F4 would be Teal's 1.2. So, yeah, the key is getting an internal improvement, and they need to get that internal improvement where these guys, these young players, reach their ceilings rather than their floors. That has to be the key goal. They cannot have regression or stagnation. And I keep saying that. It's not just for the rebuild because, I keep saying wins and losses, again, are not going to matter much next season. I mean, basically, Chris Getz has come out and said it's going to be internal improvement. And I do think, though, one of the ways that wins sort of matter, though, is again, you can see if this internal improvement is happening by them adding more wins to the win column. Yes, a 19-game win improvement in 2025 was great, but all it did was get them back to the factory standards of winning 60 games. That's the bare minimum in baseball. That's the bare minimum belief. Guaranteed to win 60, guaranteed to lose 60 is what you do with the other 42 that matters. So what you want to see to make sure that this rebuild is going in the right direction is not only, yes, internal improvement, guys like Colson and Teal and Caro and Mydroth, all making sure that they're producing better than what they did in their rookie year. But also, I would like to see another 15-win improvement. It would be nice to see the White Sox get to 75 wins because then you can definitely feel confident in, okay, once the CBA gets worked out, you can go into free agency in 2027 or go into the trade market and know, hey, we got to add this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy to make sure we're competitive because we've been all hoping it's by 2027 that they're at least starting to be competitive. They're starting to be in that wild card race. Maybe they're starting to flirt with the division title. But you can't really have that feeling or that answer unless you start to see the White Sox actually make a meaningful leap like 15 games in the win column. So that's where wins and losses will matter. Because, yeah, if they only win 65 games next season, it's kind of hard to feel confident that they're going in the right direction. Unless, again, the, kind of maybe moving the goalpost is if Colson hits 40 home runs, Kyle Teal hits 25 dingers, and, he's hitting 290. Lenyn Sosa's hit 25 to 30 home runs. Miguel Vargas is at 20. I mean, Edgar Caro's hitting 15 to 20 bombs and producing, a 300 average. I mean, then you might be able to say, okay, but again, if at least lineup-wise, if it's still just a stagnation, it's really hard to be like, hey, this thing is going in the right direction. So that's why you want to still maybe get some upgrades to help, potentially increase that win total. If they can get that ceiling production, then you got to really, really like the White Sox chances of showing improvement next season. But if it's the floor, i.e. that regression and stagnation, then I would be concerned if this rebuild is heading in the right direction. Well, one prospect that could eventually be part of the franchise being competitive is Caleb Bonemer, and Baseball America thinks he could be a top 10 prospect someday. So let's discuss how he still feels, though, a little underappreciated after the break. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, with 48 teams for the first time ever. It's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Game Time app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. And I've used Game Time for things like getting 10 tickets to a Milwaukee NBA game. I got great seats. My entire party was able to sit together with a great view of the game. Pick a game, tap a section, and have your tickets locked in within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for the fine print. Prices include fees up front, which I love. No last-second surprises at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, concert, or event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, Make it a count and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Game time. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. And Locked On is rolling out the Everydayers Club, which will feature a whole bunch of neat stuff like a Discord chat with me and fellow White Sox fans, an ad-free audio podcast, and so much more. I'm still waiting for the final pricing for the subscription. So once I get that, I'll let you know. But I hope, once I get all that information, you sign up and be part of the Everydayers Club. Well, I feel like Caleb Bonemer is really underappreciated by the fan base. And the one reason why I feel that is I keep seeing like comments in the YouTube channel on the episode page, or I even still see it on Twitter every now and again, like with White Sox social media about, Connor Griffin and JJ Weatherholt. What could have been if the White Sox drafted them in the 2024 draft? 2 top 5 prospects per MLB pipeline, with Griffin being ranked number 1 overall. And the White Sox passed on them, and they were tied to them. I mean, these were guys that they were potentially sniffing around at to draft number 5 overall. Instead, they took pitcher Hagen Smith out of Arkansas. And I know I've even critiqued the process the club used in last year's draft. I know I'm kind of one of them. And yes, I would love for the club to have taken Griffin or Weatherholt. I definitely believe they needed a high ceiling bat in the 2024 draft, but it is what it is. And the other reason why I've always been fine though with them taking Smith was, and I think that's the thing that keeps getting missed by some people that always just look in the, the black and white, with the blinders on is, and I'm going to advocate, the club mitigated passing on Griffin and Weatherholt by drafting Caleb Bonemer in the second round. He might have the potential to someday join Griffin and Weatherholt as a top 10 prospect someday, at least according to Baseball America's J.J. Cooper and Jeff Pontus. Because both discussed that he is a prospect within the White Sox system that could crack a top 10 list someday on their recent podcast. Pontes pointed out, this is basically the takeaway, and this is the quote I'll share with you about why he thinks Caleb Bonemer is the one prospect in their system that could eventually be a top 10 prospect. This is what he says, quote, "A really good all-around player with athleticism, remaining projection, and really a foundation of a hit tool, power, and approach," end quote. And BA considers him one of the White Sox top 5 prospects. I believe they were one of the first to add them to their top 100 list, or his Baseball Prospectus. It was one of the two. He is currently ranked number 73 overall per MLB Pipeline, but it did take Pipeline a little bit to kind of be on board that, hey, this guy's a top 100 prospect. And he is the 4th best prospect in the White Sox system per MLB Pipeline. But maybe we kind of underappreciate him because it feels like the White Sox just did use the poor process in passing up on Griffin and Weatherholt. But I'm fine with Hagen Smith, especially after his Arizona Fall League performance, renewed my faith in him still having a good to great potential MLB career. I mean, I do really think going into a hit environment in Arizona, in the Arizona Fall League, Smith really cleared a bar by being, by pitching so well, and especially by avoiding walks, because command was a huge issue for him, and the arm fatigue at Double-A. But when he was pitching, he did struggle with command. And in the Arizona Fall League, that definitely favors hitters. Smith passed with flying colors in terms of limiting the free passes to first base. But when you look at the process, though, the White Sox had lefty Noah Schultz in the system to replace Garrett Crochet someday as that special ace. So they probably didn't need to double down to get Hagen Smith. I mean, I did think the White Sox needed to make sure they got a good big league player with the 5th pick in the 2024 draft. I know, go back and listen to some of my shows in 2024, everydayers might recall, because they were not going to be drafting in the top 10 in 2025 because of the lottery rules. So they definitely had to get a big league player that projected to get to the majors. But I do feel they went too safe based on their history of developing left-handed aces. I think they definitely needed that potential high impact bat just a bit more, and they kind of cowered away. But it's fine because the club did follow a good process by circling back in the second round to get Bonemer and then make sure he signed on the dotted line. They paid him a $3 million signing bonus to make sure he didn't go to college ball. And if Smith becomes an ace or at least a solid rotation starting pitcher and Bonemer develops into a great player, then who cares if the White Sox passed on Griffin and Weatherholt? Basically they would have gotten now 2 for 1. That's why it could be good process in that the White Sox took Hagen Smith, who has the potential to still be an ace, and, for them to feel comfortable that, hey, we develop left-handed pitching, and then get Bonemer. Because if you have 2 guys that still have good high ceilings that could potentially help you at the big league level, I'll take that over, say, just having Connor Griffin right now or having JJ Weatherholt. And what I like about Bonemer, too, is he keeps clearing every bar thrown in front of him. I mean, think about it. He was supposedly stiff. Now he's being viewed as athletic. He may have not had good, swing decisions. Now he's got great swing decisions. They gave him a taste at high A ball, and he absolutely raked. And his age is also perfect, as he could be headlining the second wave of prospects that come up and reinforce this lineup when the team is ready to be competitive, because that's another thing they talked about. He might be one of those missing pieces. Because remember, one of the things that destroyed last decade's rebuild was there was no second wave of elite prospects that came up behind the core guys. Remember, all the core guys came up basically at the same time. Eloy and Luis Robert Jr. and Michael Kopech, although he was hurt, but even then when he came, and Garrett Crochet, and all the guys basically came up between 2017 and 2020, and then they were competitive. But then there were still holes at second base and like right field, and you still could have used, maybe some help in the depth part, and they never got those reinforcements, or they never got those players that other teams wanted besides their core guys to make those huge trades that put you over the top. They had to keep going bargain bin shopping for like Lance Lynn, that type of stuff. But the other thing is maybe Bonemer continues to ascend. If he continues to ascend at the rate he has been, maybe he beats the timeline of making it to the big leagues in 2028. Maybe he's up in 2027. And the White Sox do like to challenge their top prospects to beat those timeline projections. I mean, if he has another OPS over 1,000 at high A, there's no reason to keep him at Winston-Salem for that long of a time. I mean, I like how they kept him at Kannapolis. He was 19, that type of, kind of gradually get him used to even pro ball. And then they gave him a taste. But if he's raking at Winston-Salem, I don't care if he's 20, get him to Double A. So if he has a good month or two with the dash, he should get to Birmingham then and finish out 2026. And then maybe he's at Charlotte if he's producing at Birmingham in 2027. And if he continues to grow at this solid to great rate of growth, maybe he's in Chicago by mid-2027. But either way, this is a prospect that I think it's time to appreciate rather than pine for what the White Sox don't have. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, find the Locked On MLB podcast where there's no off season. So it keeps you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed MLB fan. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or listen to your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'll be back tomorrow with your mailbag questions and comments. You can leave comments about today's episode on the episode page on YouTube via email, lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. On X, formerly Twitter, at Lockdown Sox or at TajDub. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube. Leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Lockdown White Sox or wherever you get your audio-only podcasts. Have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.